Welcome to TCAF 2021. My name is Faduma. I'm from the TCAF's programming team. Welcome to the last panel of this festival, No Holds Barred. Before we begin, the Toronto Comic Arts Festival would like to honor and acknowledge the original caretakers of this land, the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are in a territory that was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Pump Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to share and care for the land. We also acknowledge that this area is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. TCAF makes this acknowledgement as a reminder that we are all treaty people and that we have a responsibility to the land and each other. This acknowledgement is a touchstone in our process of thinking through what it means to live and work on colonized land, and is an expression of solidarity with our Indigenous siblings. TCAF commits to strengthening its relationship with Indigenous communities in Toronto and increasing Indigenous voices and perspectives in our programming. Thank you everyone for coming. Just a note, if you want to turn on closed captioning, you can turn it on by clicking on the screen at the bottom right corner, the screen button at the bottom right corner, sorry. Welcome everyone to No Holds Barred. No Holds Barred is a discussion about the impact of pro wrestling in our lives as artists who are inspired by the history and culture. We'll talk about the history of women in pro wrestling, what makes us fans of pro wrestling, and how pro wrestling informed our artistic practices, and much more. Featuring our guests, Jaime Hernandez, Jarrett Williams, Katie Skelly, and tag team Aubrey, Sitterson, and Chris Moreno, and I guess myself, because I like to geek out with y'all, and with our special guest moderator, S-Quire Johnson. Thank you so much for joining us. And I will pass the mic on to S-Quire, who will officially start this Royal Rumble match for us. Take it away, S-Quire.
Thank you so much, Faduma. Greetings and salutations, everyone. Welcome once again to No Holds Barred. From my understanding, this was actually a movie back in the day, so I don't know as far as who's playing Hulk Hogan and who's playing Zeus in this one, but you know, at least we'll be able to get things off on a great note. I'm really looking forward to this conversation with all of you. As I said before we actually went live, like I've actually become a fan of all of these creatives in one way or another, including you, Faduma. Don't try to like slide and think that just because you're a part of TCAF that you're not an amazing creative yourself. But just the fact alone that we have this privileged opportunity to be able to talk about two of my biggest loves in terms of comic books and pro wrestling, I'm sorry, this is that geek out moment that I've been looking for. So yeah, let's try to get into it. I want to be able to go around first and give the opportunity to everyone to introduce themselves, to talk about what it is that they're into, and before we actually get into the meat and potatoes of this whole thing. So I'm just going to start off by who I'm seeing on my screen first off. The incomparable. I almost feel like I need to have like a Howard Finkel voice for this, like something like that, to be able to do like an announcing. Introducing, coming to the ring first, Chris Moreno. Take it away. Let everybody know who you are, Chris.
I'm Chris Moreno. I've been working in comics since 2001. Now I'm working at like sort of splitting time between animation and comics. Yeah, I've worked with Aubrey on the comic book story of professional wrestling. That's sort of, I guess, what sort of gives me the bona fides for the panel. This was our second collaboration together, our third one. We've got a Kickstarter for right now called Stone Master. That's in its last few days. But yeah, I've loved wrestling since I was a kid. So it's like, you know, my dad, like all things, like both of these things got me into comics and wrestling. And, you know, just getting an opportunity to do a book like we did was just sort of like a full circle moment, you know, for me in my life. So it's been pretty cool.
Thank you so much, Chris. I know for a fact, like you've got like a lot more to share within this session as we're going along. I'm actually going to be bringing in your tag team partner on this amazing project right here. Just coming in with a head of hair that, again, I've got to aspire to at this point. Ladies, gentlemen, and everyone else in between, Aubrey Sitterson. Take it away, Aubrey.
Hey man, thanks so much for having me. I am super stoked to be here. Chris went ahead of me, so I don't have to tell you that Stone Master, the Stoner Kung Fu comic, is available on Kickstarter right this very second. I don't even have to mention it. Of course, with Chris, I did the comic book story Professional Wrestling, and coming out in June, I've got The Worst Dudes with Tony Gregory. Coming out in July, I got Savage Hearts with Jed Doherty, and available right now. Trade paperback form, the comic you always wanted, No One Left to Fight with Fico Ossio, and Beef Bros. My previous Kickstarter is hitting mailboxes. Maybe not as we speak. It might be a little late for the USPS to be out and about, but back again on Monday. So there's a lot, man. There's a lot, and I'm stoked, and I'm thrilled to be here. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being here, Aubrey. They're already saying inside the chat that you got the best hair in the biz, apparently.
Listen, I know. Thank you, but I know. This isn't new information. Thank you.
Next up, I'm sorry. I thought that I had a brother in arms before we actually got started, but apparently he turned heel, and apparently I'm the only one with the red headphones inside this piece. But hopefully we'll be able to get on the same page again. Everyone, please welcome Jarrett Williams. How you doing today, Jarrett?
How are you? First of all, I'm happy to be here talking to you, S-Quire, as well. To everyone watching, my name is Jarrett Williams, born and raised in New Orleans, but I'm based out here in Savannah. And I do a pro wrestling graphic novel series called Super Pro KO, which I've loved working on. And I also do a couple of other books as well. I do Rick and Morty comics at Oni Press. And I also am working on this kids mystery comic called Harper Sharp at Random House Graphic coming out next year too. So I'm kind of juggling a few things. But like Chris was talking about earlier, got into pro wrestling and comics right around the same time. So I really have been looking forward to this conversation. It's actually my first comic virtual anything post-COVID year. So I'm just really excited to talk to everybody.
And I'm having a moment right now, just in between all of this, but I wanted to be able to, I have the esteemed pleasure of being able to speak and introduce Katie Skelly and Jaime Hernandez. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a part of this panel. Let everybody know who y'all are.
I'm Katie Skelly, and I'm a cartoonist as well as a writer about comics. And I edited Jaime's new art book, Queen of the Ring. And here's Jaime.
Yeah, and I'm Jaime. I think I'm the oldest guy in the room here. I've been doing comics professionally since 1982, which is Love and Rockets, and I'm still doing Love and Rockets almost 40 years later. I've always been, it's obvious in my work all through the years that I've always been a wrestling fan because I'm always sticking in little hints or whatever. And at the same time, while I was doing my comic work, I was always doing wrestling drawings on the side, but I thought the wrestling drawings were not commercial, that I could get them, that they should be published or what. But it wasn't till Katie and I talked about it, and she kind of convinced me to do this book because it was work that was never going to ever be seen, and so it worked out really cool, and it gave us the right to be in this panel.
You just say the right, Jaime?
Right.
They're already calling you an OG in the chat. They know who
Facts.
you are. Your
Facts.
reputation precedes itself when it comes to the industry, for sure. And the fact alone, you end up seeing people talking about how Queen Reina was, again, their first body positive role model. These are the type of impacts that you've actually had on your fan base. So no, this is something where we appreciate and we love the fact that you're here and being able to actually speak with us about, again, pro wrestling and comic books. This is just amazing. So if anything, I would just say let's just get into it. And I know for a fact Chris had actually started off with this, so I'm actually going to start with Chris on that first question now, to go a little bit deeper as far as what would you say. Oh, actually, I'm going to go most recently now. What was actually the most recent wrestling-related piece of media that you've taken in, whether it's in the last week, the last month or so? What was the last wrestling bit that you actually took in most recently?
Gosh. I mean, it's tangential, but my wife and I finished watching that first season of Young Rock, the sitcom about The Rock. But I would say probably close second to that was probably just looking up Ric Flair promos on YouTube, because that's a hole I started falling down when we were doing the wrestling book, but now I just can't stop. Like, I will just literally just hit YouTube and just work my way down the line. And there's a lot of them. People love collecting them. So, but yeah, that's probably like the close second to it. Is sort of promos, because then I will then send them to my brother and my dad, and and we'll all just sort of watch them together.
You gotta love the classics, and I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
Over the top nature of Ric Flair is just phenomenal. Just to be able to see his work in like NWA and WCW, I don't feel that there was anybody better outside of Dusty Rhodes on the mic than Ric Flair. That's just my humble opinion. But yeah, the fact alone that you went for the classics most recently, that's pretty dope.
He was one of my favorites to draw for the book. The Woo face though was very difficult to capture in all of its glory. That one I probably spent hours just really trying to
You did a really good job getting the neck sinews, though.
Yeah,
those are like the most important part of the Woo face.
It's a pyramid, with his head at the top.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the feathered hair. The feathered hair was
sinews and feathery hair. Those are the key ingredients of a good Ric Flair drawing.
That's where Farrah Fawcett, she only had like one half of the equation.
Yes, that's why Ric Flair is empirically better than Farrah Fawcett. You heard it here first.
Okay, that's going to turn into a meme just now, I believe. So I'm going to bring it over to you, Aubrey. What was the most recent wrestling relating thing that you took in?
Brother, this is sad, but I was watching New Jack yesterday.
Right.
I was reliving some great New Jack moments, man, which there are a lot of, because rest in power, New Jack. That guy brought what I think is one of the most crucial parts for a wrestler to have, which is menace. Right? New Jack was a menacing, frightening presence that you believed that guy was going to hurt whoever he was in the ring with. And these sound like horrible things I'm saying, but everybody's a wrestling fan, so they get it, right? Like that's what you want from a wrestler. You want to believe that this person is out to do damage to the other person in the ring with them, and that was always evident with New Jack, whether it was coming out to the ring, whether it was wrestling the match, whether it was just talking. Just the expressions he would make, man. New Jack was a unsung. I mean, I don't know if unsung is right. I don't think he gets enough credit for how great that guy was. New Jack.
I didn't know he died.
Yeah. Just yesterday. Very sad.
Oh wow.
Right, P.
Just actually catching that news, and even to your point in terms of the whole menace piece, I dig how you actually really did a deep dive into the book. To be able to speak about that. Like, I didn't even know that menace was actually a full-on concept as far as that believability to say that, yes, these two professional wrestlers are actually working such a style that it looks as if they are trying to legitimately hurt the other person. To be able to actually blur those lines between like reality and what that fantasy is on screen. Like, y'all did a spot-on job in terms of bringing that up, so.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And New Jack was the guy who didn't hide the blade.
Right.
No, man.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, some of the stuff was just like unnerving to see him do. But again, that fearlessness was one thing that, again, you gotta respect, Actually, if that's the case, Jaime, I want to be able to bring it to you. What was the most recent wrestling related piece of media that you would take in over the last little bit?
The last one? I think it was when Thunder Rosa and Dr. Baker just bloodied each other to death. Yeah, and I was like, I don't watch wrestling that much anymore, but this one kind of holds up.
I'm telling you, I was amazed by seeing that particular match. And again, hearing the chatter on social media as far as being for it or against it or so on. And and we're going to get into that a bit more when we talk about as far as the history of women's wrestling and stuff like that. But it felt so good to be able to see such a genuinely dope match between two stars that you knew for a fact were just breaking through, that maybe the casual WWE fan may not have actually known about, but they'll be able to see this match online and they'll be able to actually pay that respect when the time comes. And their stock has just risen since that time. It was so good, Josh. I agree. Katie, what about you? Wrestling most recently. What was the most recent wrestling bit that you've taken in?
Most recently, I mean, we were watching AEW the other night, and there's a wrestler whose name I can't remember, but she's also a dentist. And like her whole thing is like,
That's Britt Baker.
Britt Baker DDS. And I was just like, DDS, like, like my sister is a dentist. And I was like, I wonder if she could like do both. And so I really enjoyed watching that. And then I also got a little bit into AEW over the summer because I finally played Undertale, the video game. I like never played it. Finally like took the 24 hours to like learn it. And I got so into Sans and I was like, he's so cute. I love Sans. And then Kenny Omega like dressed as Sans randomly. Like I just saw that come up and I was like, what the hell? So now I'm like, I'm into him. I'm into the dentist. Like I'm back. It had been a few years, but I'm back.
Oh my goodness. I have been standing over AEW over the last little bit. And yes, Carlos, you're right. It is the Omega effect at this point. To see him in his belt collector persona at this point, he most recently actually picked up on top of the AEW World Championship, the Impact World Championship. There's already rumblings to say that New Japan is going to be next. That's what people want to be able to see. But it almost feels like that's going to be like the final boss of that particular storyline that he's creating where that's concerned, to be able to have everything go full circle. Very, very, very dope. Jarrett, got to be bringing it over to you. Most recent bit of wrestling media that you've caught over the last little bit.
Yeah, they're kind of polar opposites, but this morning I was literally drawing to old Mid-South wrestling clips. Like Buzz Sawyer promo was the last thing I remember listening to because he's one of my faves. And then also on the flip end, I told Faduma this off, the panel, but I had finally caught up on WrestleMania, and because I had been having all these like weird issues behind the scenes that kept me from watching it. And I mean, when I say I was standing last night over Bianca Belair and Sasha Banks, I was like losing it. And literally in tears at one point because I realized how big this moment was, and I was like, oh my gosh, and to know that they feel it too. So yeah, two different ends, like the current, and then like I constantly draw to like old school, like Mid-South, world class, NWA. Like that's like my favorite era of wrestling, hands down. So
yeah, you had actually talked about in a few other interviews as far as how you grew up on Mid-South pro wrestling back in the day. And like a lot of the other territorial shows and so on were just, you saw it was actually very cool. And I saw that synergy also with Aubrey and Chris's book, talking about as far as how the territories allowed for performers to put on those different characters. They could be like a good guy or a face in one territory, heel in the next, and to be able to see that dynamic and figure out what works, unbelievable. And yeah, on the other side being history made in terms of WrestleMania, but Bianca Belair, and I was one of the ones with the tearjerker. Someone was crying onions in my house once I actually watched that match because it meant so much for what it was inside that moment, to be able to see Bianca's true star actually being made from that end. And I'll be honest with you, I was one of the ones that didn't think WWE would actually be willing to do something like that. But the fact that they had that willingness to be able to actually put everything on Bianca in that way, amazing.
Yeah, it felt great.
Yeah. Faduma, what about you? Most recent bits with your Wolfpack top on. Let's go.
I went, you know what, leading up to this panel, I just kind of went on this rabbit hole again. I was just like replaying, how on YouTube they replay like WrestleMania 37 highlights, and it's just so jarring to see the evolution of like guests that come back. Like we got Bradshaw, and I was like, you were like you were with, like, I can't believe like you're wearing a cowboy hat, and like I just grew up watching him become like turn from anarchist to cowboy in a matter of decades, and I'm like, oh my goodness. For me, I just love reliving the drama series within WWE. So there's so much drama, there's so many chapters, but one that I returned to was the kidnapping of Stephanie McMahon.
Yes.
and who ran over Stone Cold Steve Austin. And like that was a mystery, and I was so invested to the point where I started falling behind in my homework. So, and the thing is, like with whole Bianca Belair, like I was triggered only because I just remembered how like what Bret Hart went through in terms of the politics of you know, the organization and how things should play out. And then it's just kind of like, I don't know if this is going to happen. I shouldn't put my hopes up, but also it's just, I'm just glad it turned out the way that it did. But I think growing up, I become more skeptical about
Totally.
the inner workings of things. And as you get older, you can't help but like your cynicism sort of grows, I guess. So yeah, just, I always go back to the nostalgic clips of like, you know, what happened to Stephanie McMahon and like the Triple H sham wedding and like, and now they're married for real. So it's like, what? Yeah, anyways, I'm gonna fall back because I'm just gonna start talking on and on. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you could have done that storyline today too with, you know, someone's daughter being drugged. Like that would never happen today.
I forgot that was part of it. I thought she was just in the car. And I was like, yeah, you can't actually do that. So actually looking back, that went over my head as a kid, but now looking back, I'm like, that's messed up. But yeah,
into the Vince Russo era for sure.
Yeah,
his fingerprints were all over that. Definitely, like that was when you would end up seeing one talking about the Monday Night War between WWE and WCW, talking about how it was one thing where you saw that everybody was hungry in order to put on the best product, but this is the part where you saw so many risks being taken in terms of the content and trying to push that envelope. So yeah, for sure 2021 it wouldn't have actually held up at all by any means, but it is still something where you see that thankfully there were a lot more positive elements that came out of that era that you could actually speak to now. Actually with regards to that, and I feel that we actually already answered this question, that again, I believe that we're all fans of professional wrestling now compared to where we are, but how do you feel that being a fan of professional wrestling, and I'm putting this out to everybody, how do you feel that being a fan of professional wrestling has changed over the years? Or do you feel, is it something that is more accepted now in like the wider like general public? Is it still something where you're looking at it and it's more taboo? Like, what are your thoughts on being a fan of professional wrestling in 2021?
I mean, I'll say that I find, and I don't know if it's just because of age, but I find that I am more confidently owning it than I was when I was a lot younger. Keep in mind, I was in high school during the whole like Stone Cold Rock years. And that's when going into school on Monday for me became everyone talking about, at one point, wrestling over football and just who was in what main event. You know, everything was being discussed. So I kind of watched it become really, really hyper cool. And then when I hit college, it kind of like trickled off again, where it wasn't really as cool to talk about it. But now I don't know if it's because I'm in my 30s as well, where I see people like proudly in public wearing AEW shirts or Ring of Honor or New Japan. Like I see it more visibly now than I did even a couple years ago.
Yeah,
It is true. It's go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Jaime. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I don't know if there's a difference from what I grew up with and what is now, but you know, you have your moments. Because I mean, I grew up watching it in the 60s, you know, so I went through the 60s, 70s, 80s, you know, all that stuff. And but the thing that I love the most about it is that the sense of humor and the boasting and the you know, all that. There's nothing like it in the world, elsewhere in the world. Wrestling has its own brand of acting, entertainment, just pushing them around, and it's something that I've always like took pride in, that you can't get this anywhere else. You know, comedians can try to be funny. They're okay, they're funny, but you can never be like like what they used to call locker room interviews, where where you go, oh, the show is kind of dull today, and then they interview Roddy Piper, and
Yeah.
he place. He wrestled a lot in LA in the 70s, and he would just take that thing and just go. And I heard that was the same with Rhodes and Flair, that they go, okay, we're gonna turn this on. So they would just give those two guys a mic, and they would carry the whole show, and I just love that. And it's like I was saying, it's just like nothing else anywhere. And like I said, I take pride in that, that wrestling is its own thing and always has been.
Oh, definitely. Aubrey, I want to pitch this over to you because there was an interview that you had done a couple years ago that you had actually gone into the idea of professional wrestling being the one true sport, and it expanded.
We did a whole book about it, brother.
Yes.
It's in the subtitle, man. It's right there.
The comic book story of professional
There
wrestling.
it is. Yeah, man. Available right now.
Yes. So I want for you to go in for those people that have not had the opportunity to take in this book. By the way, please take in all of the books from these amazing artists, by the way. I want to be able to find out more from you as far as that statement in terms of professional wrestling being the one true sport, and like what your take is on that particular concept.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I don't want to give the milk away for free entirely, right? People should buy the book to find out. But yeah, like the idea is that what we like about sport, right, as a spectator, right, is the emotional drama that arises out of competition, right? And this can happen in any number of ways, in any number of different sports, right? But it's not a guarantee, right? We've all watched boring sporting events, right? I don't want to call any specific ones out, right? I don't want to offend anybody, but any sporting event, there's boring ones sometimes, right? And wrestling sidesteps this because wrestling is designed to give you this emotional experience every single time out when it's done properly, right? And the fact that wrestling is not and that's what makes wrestling not a sport at all, because it's predetermined, right? It's fixed. And the fact that it's not a sport at all kind of conversely gives it this hyper existence of sport. It accomplishes all the things that sport does when it's at its best by not being a sport at all, which I think is also, which is a wacky bit of circular logic that I love, because I'm a weird guy, and B, because it speaks to the circumspection of wrestling. And the nature of wrestling is this shifting of goalposts of reality in terms of what you know and what you think you know, and what you think is the staged part and what is actually the staged part. And that's one of the most interesting things about doing the research for the comic book story professional wrestling is, there is always this discussion of, when did wrestling stop being real? And like, when did people, start being in on the joke and like knowing that this stuff is fixed? And the answer is, I don't know, around like 1910, right? like it's been over 100 years since there have been newspaper articles and major outlets discussing how these things are fixed and rigged. But the ability of wrestling promoters and the willingness of wrestling fans to buy into this to buy into this carnival game, right? And to go on this ride really speaks to the power of these kind of fundamental emotional elements of engaging with sport, which again happens by virtue of not being a sport at all. And I find that I could do another like 10 laps of that if you want me to, but other people want to talk, I think.
But that's what I think, jumping on what Aubrey was saying, that was one of the things that was so fun about doing the book, and also in sort of looking back on like, even like looking back on our experiences, like with wrestling, like even like growing up and stuff like that, like, there really is nothing like it that blurs that line between like the fantasy and the reality part, right? Like Michael Keaton plays Batman in a movie. There's no mistaking the fact that he is not Batman and doesn't fight crime or anything like that, right? But the equivalent of that would be if Michael Keaton was doing press for Batman and a crime happened and he immediately like stopped the interview to go fight crime. Like wrestling has that element to it, where it's like, it almost like you don't know when it starts and when it stops. And as a fan of it, that's an amazing experience, because it's like it's not like when you watch a movie or TV show and the credits roll and that experience is over. Like it could keep happening for you. You could watch interviews and it continue to sort of experience it on other levels. And I feel like a lot of entertainment is just starting to catch up to that now, more recently, with like even like streaming services, or just the fact that there's all this sort of multimedia-ness to things. But I feel like pro wrestling was kind of ahead of its time in terms of realizing how all touch points of it, like any way that it's touching you as a fan, it all sort of connects back to the main experience.
I need to make sure I'm taking notes.
But
On this. So, yo,
we couldn't hear you for a little bit. I don't know about y'all, but I couldn't hear.
You couldn't hear?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah,
Perfect.
perfect.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah, we'll just make sure that the mic is where it needs to be. So moving forward, and what I found was that with a lot of your works, and not just because of the fact that the works that we're talking about are focused on pro wrestling, but there were some interesting parallels that I'd actually taken, especially when I was reading Aubrey and Chris's work and how they actually made the parallel between pro wrestling and burlesque as far as that particular art form, and even just making that connection to with regards to Jaime and Katie's work, and seeing as far as the attention to detail that was being presented from a lot of the, I would say, more historical depictions of the different artists that were actually being brought in, like that pinup type of look, being able to see as far as the different poses. And Jaime, I gotta say, like the way that you would actually portrayed those wrestlers, those women inside those pieces, it was as if you had fully studied the way that a photographer would be actually covering a wrestling match between those, but in those particular moments in the 60s and 70s. You could tell that was fully in. And I just wanted to see as far as like what you thought in terms of like making that connection, Chris and Aubrey, around like contemporary burlesque and pro wrestling, and seeing as far as those connections from there, because that was a very, very unique like link that y'all made towards that I've never heard before. Like, could y'all expand on that?
Chris, do you want to go, or do you want me to? I feel like I'm talking too much.
Yeah, man, you go for it.
Okay, listen, you don't have to tell me twice. So, the idea is...
I tagged you.
I'm ready. So the idea is that wrestling is a burlesque of masculinity, in the same way that traditional burlesque is a performance and a exaggeration of femininity. Wrestling is that for kind of traditionally masculine gendered traits and acts and behaviors. And that's, and that manifests itself as, the fact that every problem in wrestling gets solved with one way: violence. These two people are going to beat the hell out of each other, right? It doesn't matter what the problem is. Everything is this exaggerated, kind of amped up testosterone. Violence solves every problem. Honor and loyalty are major, major components. It is an exaggerated performance of masculinity, and it uses that to kind of put you through the paces of emotional beats, in the same way that traditional burlesque is a performance of these exaggerated versions of femininity.
Is there anything that you want to add on that, or?
I mean, he just about nailed it, I think.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I've been practicing.
I'd be curious about Jaime's sort of take on it, especially in sort of the depictions of the lady wrestlers. I know, S-Quire, you sort of touched on it a little bit in terms of that sort of homage, or at least the reference to the sort of photographic styles of that time.
Yeah, What's the question?
I was just curious, like, making those sort of parallels towards burlesque, in terms of the artwork that you've been doing with the wrestlers.
Right. I would say it's more that reading wrestling magazines since I was little, and there would be photos of, it was, especially in the early days, it was territorial. So the only wrestling I got was, I was born outside of LA, about an hour away. So we got LA TV, and we would watch from the Olympic Auditorium, and that was the only wrestling you'd see. But if you saw it in a magazine, it was like, I don't know who this guy Bruno Sammartino is.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess he's from somewhere else, or something like that. And so the photos meant a lot in depicting the pictures, and it's like doing a drawing. It's a still of action, and the photographer takes a lot of pictures, and he picks the best one, that doesn't have them with their eyes closed or something. And so I just really got into that, a still image of action, and it just kind of felt natural, like doing my comics. If I had an action scene, I would pick the best angle, of course, to portray that. And so, a lot of that was the wrestling magazine just had this still picture, and it just kind of spoke volumes, especially if there was a caption above or something, or a title above the article or something. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
No, again, it's just I always appreciate as far as that attention to detail that usually comes in, and even seeing as far as the contrast, even with like Jarrett's work, that is very fantastical. Like when you pick up a volume of Super Pro KO and so on, you're seeing the blast lines, you're seeing the exaggerated faces, and it's almost like I'm actually watching an episode of TV, like of WWE Raw.
Good. That's what I wanted to do. Good.
SmackDown and so on. You saw like that connection that was there. So it's interesting to be able to see those particular depictions in that respect. Katie, I wanted to actually bring a question over to you, because this was actually one of your first, was this actually your first like editorial gig in terms of comics itself, to working with Jaime with this project?
Yeah, definitely. I'd had a few like short stints doing some anthology editing, but this was the biggest scale for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Now I wanted to find out as far as what actually drew you to actually be a part of this particular project, and especially how we touched on where women's wrestling has actually evolved into where it is actually now, where we actually see individuals like Sasha Banks, like Dr. Britt Baker, like Bianca Belair, that are headlining these major pay-per-views over time, and seeing as far as what artists like Jaime have been able to do over the years. Like, what drew you to being a part of that connection? And as a fan of pro wrestling, what is your take in terms of the way that women's pro wrestling is usually being seen right now, just from your perspective?
It's interesting. It doesn't feel like it's as gimmicky. Of course, all wrestling, has to have a gimmick, but it does feel like it's taken a lot more seriously. It's not just strictly like something that happens in between men's matches. There are people that are legitimate fans of particular female wrestlers that, follow their careers, whether they're wrestling or being a dentist or whatever. So I think that that's really cool. And that's definitely changed from, when I grew up to now. But in terms of the book, what I really liked about Jaime's drawings of this particular subject is that he brings so much of his understanding, which is pretty comprehensive, of women's wrestling to these drawings. And for the longest time, they were tucked away and they were hidden. I was lucky enough to see them, and I felt like that wasn't fair to the rest of the world. And so I started, bothering Jaime essentially to like, please, can I put this together? Because I think people would really enjoy this, not just, as fans of you or of the comics, but just as you as an artist, because there's so much workmanship in all of these drawings. There are drawings that are not finished, so you get to see pencils, you get to see colored pencils, which is very rare for Jaime's work. So there's really a lot there to enjoy. And another thing that I'm very pleased with about the book is that the price point is very affordable, I think. There are a lot of really great collections of Jaime's work that you can take a look at. But this one, I feel like, if you're even just a casual fan of either Jaime or women's wrestling, this is a really great find. So I think the other thing that's really cool is that it blends this world of very real history and Jaime's like personal topography of all of the women's wrestling media that he consumed. So like you said, we are looking at drawings that are sort of simulacra of photographs, and then the personal sort of like pin-up promotional shots, like the girls like holding all the money. Like the first time I saw those, I was like, yeah, we have to get these out there. Like I am so inspired, but I want to be that girl. You know what I mean? Like I want to be. So I was like, that's awesome. And there's so much there, and there's so much love for this subject and for the way that it was documented, because he was also doing replications of magazines, covers of magazines, even the text inside the magazines, like the big headlines. I think those were the first ones that I saw of these works. And I saw them and I was just like, these should be gigantic. And like in the gallery, people need to see these. So I'm very, very pleased that he let me talk him into doing the book. And I think there's just so much there. So yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So I actually want to be able to bring in one more question over to Jarrett before we actually get into the Q&A.
Okay.
So again, speaking towards a lot of what I've actually been able to see through the volumes, there really is that vibe of that hero's journey that actually ties towards the episodic realms of it. But at the same time, you're actually giving personality to the announcers that are there catching the matches. You're seeing as far as the backstage politics that usually would actually be on if you're actually watching like a WrestleTalk.com type of podcast or something like that, to get something behind the scenes. Like, what drove you to actually want to incorporate all of those particular elements and not just make it about the match per se? Like you wanted to be able to actually build that universe within Super Pro KO within that space.
Yeah, it was a couple of reasons actually. I really wanted to do the craft of wrestling and its just over the top production justice in book form. On top of that, I didn't really see enough like sports themed comics just in the American comic book scene. So I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I want to make sure that if anyone was a fan of the same period of wrestling that I am, that they could open this book and feel that, oh, this guy has watched wrestling. And for me, even a big part of that is I try to really incorporate the crowds and the fans, because for me growing up, that was such a huge part of the show, and the production were the signs and the merchandise. It was super commercial, and I just wanted, when you read through Super Pro KO, you felt like you were in this universe for just a period of time. The commentators were a big part. In fact, when we talk about wrestling and comics, that's one of the few, like one of the connections is that, the captions in the comic are no different than the commentators in wrestling, kind of like working you through the narrative and the rivalries and why what you're watching on the screens is really, really important. And so when I do Super Pro, I really wanted the commentators to have an active role in the fights, and even coming up with a way for you to know which commentator was talking without seeing them was important to me, because I wanted to be able to keep the focus on the action during the matches. So I came up with these sort of symbols for the commentators, which was just, again, me trying to work through how do I, articulate all this. But I think I kind of got it right. I think I did my best. And I could tell over the course of the series, by the third volume, I was just like, okay, I'm going to run amok with this. So if I have, wrestlers fighting out in the arena, in the crowd, you're going to see like people in the crowd pat them on the back, and you're going to see like the sweat drops. And I just really wanted to kind of give you those big pro wrestling over the top moments while reading the book. So
captured extremely well, and it's something where a lot of the panels, like, you're not expecting that particular point that you're able to actually capture where that's concerned. Even in the area, there was one wrestler that was actually so dejected because they actually lost, like in volume 1, that again, Joe was actually coming to one of the wrestlers that actually lost their first match, and then seeing as far as how yeah, because we got you, Patricia. We'll do our best to keep the volume. But yeah, just being able to see as far as how some of the characters actually take losses so hard, and being able to once again blur those particular lines that you captured it so well. I'm going to quickly get into a few of the Q&A questions that have actually been brought in. And it actually kind of ties into what we were just talking about earlier. Claudio had actually had asked, what do you feel, and I'm going to pose this to everybody, but what do you feel are the challenges to interpreting wrestling in comics? Like, you could see as far as how, like, again, storylines could actually mesh, and as far as a lot of the similarities, but what do you feel are some of the challenges that you have in terms of interpreting wrestling, whether it is writing it or illustrating it in that respect?
I mean, I think one of the biggest is just you don't have the benefit of motion, right? So like Jaime was saying, you have to kind of pick the best moments. And I know, like, for me on our book, some of the moves don't look as good. Like, some of the moves don't look as good still. So having to try to find like the right angle or the right portion of a move, like to give it that drama, I think that's like a big challenge. Some things you can sort of kind of capture. You're either capturing that moment right before or the aftermath, but like in those little middle areas, some of the grapples, I remember like some of the grappling holds and stuff, like I had trouble finding like a good version, because it was just sort of like, well, this just looks like a Twister game. Like if it's where if you pick the wrong spot, it just looks like they're just, I don't know, just kind of rolling around on the mat, but not the pain, right? Like it's like it's the concept in wrestling of selling a move, right? It's like, but as an artist, you have to sell it. You have to sell them selling it, and so it's like it adds this kind of other level of complexity. That's what I encountered, at least on the artwork end.
I'm going to try to paraphrase another question that came in from Matt S., where they actually talked about as far as how there is like an abundance of wrestling that you're able to catch in, whether it is WWE, AEW, Impact, Ring of Honor. Like, you have a number of different areas that you can even go to where that's concerned. And the question came out was that, how do you think that this overabundance of wrestling impacts what it means to be a fan and the scene as a whole? That like is a much bigger question where that's concerned. But yeah, what do you think of how having so many options impacts the way that you can enjoy the art form as a fan?
I think that from what I've noticed, I feel like people are so much more interested in what's going on behind the scenes than I've ever seen before. Like, they're, even just recently, things like contracts being leaked and people getting really into those, and it helps you understand the history a lot better too, of like, how did this person rise and how did this person kind of disappear? It's almost, it's a lot like reality TV in that way. Like, I'm a big Real Housewives fan. And so very similar to wrestling. They fight a lot. There's always what you see, and of course a lot of that is bravado and making things up too, like on the spot. But then there's this whole other world of, people digging into contracts and blog posts and social media. There's just this entire world that goes beyond this simulated world of wrestling. And I feel like that is what's drawing people. Like, in a way, it's almost like this mystery that you're able to participate in now,
Yeah. Now, apparently Vivian went on and said, Real Housewives Wrestling, I'm all in. Something right there. I don't know if taking up that trademark, but somebody better pick it up. I've got an audience. So yeah, and I also see like somewhere inside the chat that they were talking about as far as the whole Tough Enough phase. Like, as before it actually became or evolved into NXT. Just seeing as far as again how Katie had actually put it out very well, like we get more connected towards what's happening behind the scenes, because I think it feels like we've actually turned a corner in terms of it being widely recognized that this is a performative sport. It's not something and everything is predetermined and stuff like that. So now it's a matter of being able to get to know the personalities behind the characters that are being developed, right? Just the same way as how it's usually seen, like how we've been able to know it from the longest time, instead of actually crying about how it's real. It's real to me. That type of thing. Another question that came in, I believe I'm seeing, is from Josh Hicks, and they actually state, I feel like there are weirdly a bunch of parallels between the lifestyles of a cartoonist and a wrestler. That
Yes.
there's a level of physical grind, traveling from show to show, hustling at a merch table, a whole bunch of different things that go along the line.
There's no health insurance.
Ooh, yes, absolutely. Like you gotta
That's
go.
a good one, right?
You know
Yes,
what? I'm gonna try to.
that's a
pitch
big
this
one.
question. I'm a perfect segue, Aubrey. I'm gonna pitch this question to you then. Do
Uh-oh.
you feel like whether it's cartooning or just being in the comic book industry, does it color the way that you enjoy or that you connect with wrestling?
Yeah, it does actually, and I fell back into wrestling fandom in a really real way when I was working at Marvel Comics as an editor, and I needed, wrestle or comics had been my hobby, and then I got this job working in comics, and I realized, well, I need something separate, right? Like I need like a different hit also, and I kind of stumbled across professional wrestling again, and there are an abundance of similarities to professional wrestling and comics, and especially superhero comics, right? But I think a lot of the ones that people talk about the most in terms of being morality tales and adolescent power fantasies and stuff like that, like I think that those are kind of shallow similarities. To me, what I recognize in wrestling from comics the most is the ephemeral nature of a wrestling match or a show or an event. And, I think in wrestling and comics, both in recent decades, this has started changing, right? Because of the prevalence of collected work in comics, streaming networks and YouTube for professional wrestling. But the fact of the matter is, for generations, this was work that was primarily made to get you to watch or read the next one. That was the primary purpose served of this work. And so, the grinding pace and constant soap opera and, this like rootedness in act 2 of a story that just goes on for decades, I think is something that expresses itself in wrestling and comics in similar but also very different ways, and I think for some people it's a bad thing. It's something to run away from, is this idea that, we can't look at this work as ephemeral or disposable because that devalues the work. And I kind of, watching wrestling, being a wrestling fan, kind of gave me a different view of it, which is no, that the ephemeral nature of wrestling and comics both is actually something really beautiful, because it means that it makes it all the more important that you create moments, that every single panel on every single page of every single issue is something powerful and worth remembering. And that's something that wrestling is excellent at build, and because that is the way that a wrestling match is structured. It's building to specific moments that mean something to you. And that to me has been kind of the most interesting and inspiring connection between the two.
That actually segues into the last Q&A point that I want to be able to pitch to everybody. And I'm going to do my best to try to do this as a rapid fire way as possible. So I'm going to go around and I'm going to be asking you, just as far as a question from Sam Thomas, who would you say was the most influential wrestling character, in your opinion, for yourself, or wrestling gimmick that had an influence on your work? So I'm going to start with Chris. With this, the most influential wrestling character or gimmick that influenced your work.
It's kind of like a twofold thing, because it's like for me, like Roddy Piper was because I like Spider-Man was my favorite superhero, Bugs Bunny was my favorite cartoon character, Roddy Piper was my favorite wrestler. And I think you can sort of see like the through line between all three of those characters. Just kind of like fast talking, wisecracking, like, you know, just sort of goofball kind of characters. But like visually, it's like all the Lucha Libre, you know, characters I think were probably like visual touchstones. And that's something that I think I see coming up in characters I design and all throughout the work, you know, that I do. My dad's favorite was Mil Mascaras. So it was like, that was the thing, that was that image of that particular mask and that particular figure was like, would sort of come up throughout my life. So, you know, it's sort of like a twofold thing, because I grew up more with American wrestling, but like the sort of powerful imagery of the luchadors, you know, sort of carried through a lot of the visuals.
Okay, very, very dope. Jaime, same question to you. The most influential character or gimmick that's actually inspired your work?
There's so many decades. Okay, I'm just gonna throw it out there. Freddie Blassie, King of Men. You know, I mean, I saw him in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and every time that guy just knew how to make you understand how he was more superior than you. And I don't know what that has to do with my comics, but I guess it's just the strutting, you know, like Blassie, if he didn't agree with you, he just yelled and put you in your place. And, you know, and in the, you know, he had his biting period in the early 70s where the whole audience would say, "Bite, Freddie, bite, Freddie, bite," you know, and that's something to look forward to.
He filed his teeth, didn't he? Did he file his teeth? Did he have pointy teeth? Oh, fools. It's so cool.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot, but I guess Blassie would be.
Katie, same question.
I'm gonna say Jake the Snake, because I loved the documentary Beyond the Mat so much. That was one of my adult kind of entry points into wrestling. I knew it from when I was a kid, but there was something about this guy that was, he looks like David Crosby. Like, he's not a scary guy, but that he would come into the ring with like the bag with the snake in it, and everybody that spoke about him in Beyond the Mat was like, this guy was scary. Like, this guy was he was doing psychology. Like, he was crazy. And I was just like, this guy just has a stake and he just seems kind of good.
Yeah.
Before I saw it, I was like, no, I'm really compelled by this. And then of course you have this whole other world with him and his daughter who like loved Sylvia Plath. And I was like, wow, there's so much going on here. So I'm gonna say him, because I like dual nature, and I'm, as myself as like a cartoonist, I like, you know, the dark side of people, and I feel like I really saw that with him and his snakes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I could do less with the snakes, but I understood. Jarrett, your most influential character or gimmick that's inspired you?
Okay. It's a little tricky, but I think overall, I've always been biased towards villains. Like, I'm more intrigued by them. I'm more like into like, you know, their motives. And growing up, kind of that bankroll, like, you know, $1 Million Man sort of figure just stuck. So like the bad guys. So $1 Million Man, Rick Rude, I'm a huge fan of. Just visually captured the persona well, but also looked intimidating. And then I can be honest and say, even when I was developing Super Pro and thinking about, well, who would be the champion of this fictional company? I kind of modeled a lot of him off of Triple H and just sort of his tactics and his sort of like sneakiness, the nose, like everything was just like, this guy is just obnoxious and is rich. And even like his stories, like everything about him, you just kind of naturally want to like punch him in the face. Mm-hmm. And so that sort of vibe, that persona, I tend to respond, I guess the strong visceral response to. So
we had to bring up the nose. I thought we were gonna gloss past that. Oh my god. Aubrey, over to you. Most influential character or gimmick that inspired your work?
Brother, I've been a Jericho-holic since WCW Cruiserweight days. And the thing about Chris Jericho that I adore to this day is, I think it goes beyond his ability to reinvent himself and like come back with new gimmicks that always work, that always hit, right? It goes beyond that to a nimbleness to adjust to what the audience is giving him and how the audience is reacting to him, because you can see, there are a lot of wrestlers who over the years have come back with multiple successful gimmicks and characters and angles on how they interact with the fans. But what the ability that Jericho has to, if something's not hitting quite right, or if, he's supposed to be a bad guy, but people are starting to cheer him a little bit too much, and how he adjusts his behavior to compensate for that, it's brilliant. And it shows a real commitment to the true craft of professional wrestling, which is getting people to do what you want while thinking that they're not. Right? It's a con, it's a trick. And his ability to do that is, I think, unmatched. And the nimbleness that he displays in doing so.
I've always admired, as far as, once again, he was compared to, or he was actually referred to as like almost the Madonna of professional wrestling, between him and The Undertaker, for example, that they were able to span so many generations and they always felt fresh within the characters that they were portraying. But I don't feel that anyone has been at the level of Chris Jericho to be able to know exactly when to connect, when to hit those right notes when it came to storytelling, and also to find a way to be able to elevate those he either works alongside or who he's standing on the other side of the ring with. So I'm with you on that. I got the nudge from Faduma that she wanted to actually get in as far as that particular piece. Yes, I want to be able to get that question over to you as well. In terms of the most influential wrestling character or gimmick that's inspired your work over time, I want to get you in there, Faduma. Let's go.
All right. Okay, so really quickly, The Rock, hands down, only because growing up, I remember watching him as Rocky Maivia, which was kind of like a combination between his father and his grandfather's name, like High Chief Peter Maivia, and then Rocky Johnson. And then it's just, in the 6th grade, what I did was I used to finesse in English class, and like when the book reports came in, I just went on a whole binge of like autobiographies of my favorite wrestlers. And so one of them also being Amy Bass, aka Lita, which I wish we had more time to talk about, like, the politics of gender in wrestling too, because there was just a lot of rules. It's like China was able to go co-ed, toe to toe with these dudes, right? And then, but with the women's division, it was almost like, and Gail Kim spoke openly about this, it was just like, it just feels like a commercial break or like some halftime, get the girls out dancing kind of thing. And she wanted to revolutionize and change that. And I think that's been like also in the works for a very long time. But just to circle back to The Rock, I think when I read his autobiography, The Rock says in the 6th grade, I was kind of like, okay, so this dude grew up like having a pretty like normal life, because all I saw was, the matches, the kind of, and you see his personality change over time. The reason why I absolutely loved like the birth of The Rock was that he just kind of wrote his own scripts. And sometimes like Vince didn't know what the hell he was doing. And he was just like, it's like, oh shit, he's going off script. What is he gonna do? This is gonna ruin us. But then it actually turned into a whole like thing that like I think amplified the Attitude Era. And so I think for me it was just like, it was a shit show when he was with the Nation of Domination. It's like, I don't know what Owen Hart was doing there, but it worked. It was funny. But it was also like, this caricature of like, certain things that are happening in the world. This is how, like, and earlier before, like, this panel, I was talking to you about, guys, about like how I learned about world history through professional wrestling. And it's because there's this parallel like caricature universe of like movements, diasporas, a lot of, like, looking back, it's like, this is hella problematic, but we like fed into it because there was part of us that like identified with that, and just taking the pieces of that and just like, with Samoan wrestlers, Mexican wrestlers, Japanese wrestlers, and then the whole British industry in wrestling coming into play. You just sort of see how like there's like an international kind of tie-in with that. And then with The Rock growing up you know, as Black and Samoan. You know, you sort of see like him coming into himself as a person in this industry, and then also paving the way for others. So for me, it was just not just like an entertainment aspect. I think he also shaped the way the industry also creates opportunities for Black folks, Indigenous folks as well, in like a capitalistic sort of box, but it works. And so for me, I'm just like, he did all right for himself, even though he wanted to go pro, you know, NFL, but then went to CFL and got cut, didn't make the cut, and then went pro wrestling. And his dad was like, "What the hell are you doing, man? You came out, we put you through college so you could just go and hustle like me. Like, you're ruining your life." And then look at him now. It's also like a coming of age that I mirror myself in, because I'm coming into my adulthood. I'm just kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing, and then I'm like, you don't know what cards are dealt for you. And you know, it's just nice to see the kind of masks people put on despite what's happening around them in their real world. And so the autobiographies definitely played a role in my understanding of the thing as a whole. So I'm going to end that there.
Very, very, very dope. So as we actually wrap up, I want to be able to get like final thoughts from all of you amazing individuals. Again, thank you so much for being a part of this. I want to be able to start out with Chris and Aubrey. Any thoughts that you want to be able to leave? What people should be looking out for? If I need to actually plug the book once again, let me know. But yes, by all means, like weigh in, like final thoughts.
Sure. I mean, yeah, Comic Book Story of Professional Wrestling is still in print. So, I mean, that's you can find that basically anywhere. Penguin Random House was our publisher, but you can find it on Amazon. And we're still continuously very proud of it. Like the fact that it's got such a great response from not just people who are completely new to the art form and understanding it, old heads that like, you know every little thing. It's like multi-generational. Like I was talking about it a little bit before we started the panel. Like my grandfather recognized wrestlers in the book that we talked about. My dad had touch points. Like we've seen from like fathers and sons and grandfathers and their sons, like connect, like all that. We sort of tried to hit all these connection points, but again, just make it sort of accessible to everybody. And also the pro wrestling community, how much they've kind of embraced it too. I mean, we see pictures of wrestlers from matches like, Richard Schnary, the evil librarian, uses our book to like whoop on his opponents in the ring. So it's just like that kind of, that's legit. You couldn't ask for a better, sort of reception to that book. And it's because it's a love letter to the art form. Our newest thing, Stone Master, is in its like last 4 days on Kickstarter. So we're very, very close to meeting our goal. So if people want to check that out, that'd be awesome too. It's basically like, if you liked our pro wrestling book, but you wish the fights were longer, like I did, Stone Master is basically more of that, like more fights. So we're pretty psyched for that one too. But you can find me on social media as well, Twitter, Instagram, and all that.
Aubrey, throwing it over to you. Final thoughts, final words. If you want to be able to cut a promo on Jarrett, by all means, do that too.
I would never dare. The esteemed Jarrett Williams. I wouldn't dream of it. No, Chris covered it, man. If you're a wrestling fan, you probably already are a Kung Fu fan, or you should be a Kung Fu fan. I would have to do another hour on the similarities and the overlaps there. But Stone Master is Drunken Master, but set in contemporary LA and with cannabis instead of alcohol. So I don't know, like why wouldn't you want that? It's on Kickstarter right now. That's all.
Excellent. Jarrett, throwing it over to you. Final words, my friend.
Oh man, no. All I will say is just thank you for having me. Thank you to all the great questions in the chat. Also, I have several books out. Super Pro KO is like in comic shops. You can also request it. But if you just like to see me drawing cool wrestling related or just comic things in general, I post a lot of live videos on my IG, which is at Jarrod Williams. So
very cool. And then we bring it over to the dynamic duo, the illustrious tag team, Katie, Jaime. Close us out. Final thoughts, final words.
Hey, should I grab it?
Yeah.
This book comes out in August or July. I'm still not sure, but it's here, folks. You see pictures like this, just stuff I've been doing since I was young. And it's
Yeah, what's awesome. And this is my favorite drawing where she's looking at her finger and yelling. So pick it up. You can get it from Fantagraphics or your local independent comic book store.
Yeah.
Ta-da.
And keep reading Love and Rockets. We're still out there.
Honestly, I cannot say how excited I am enough to have had this opportunity to speak with all of you amazing creatives. The fact alone that, again, to be inside this space, to actually have people come through and actually talk about their love for comics and pro wrestling, this is a unique opportunity for me because the rest of the real world gives you that side eye when it comes to these types of things. So the opportunity to be able to break bread and to geek out about, again, storylines and whether pro wrestling is fake or not, and seeing all those parallels, to have that opportunity to share that space with y'all, definitely this is one of those highlights, those landmark moments. So thank you so much for y'all's input. Thank you everyone inside the chat for the Q&As. Thank you for everyone that's been supporting where that's concerned. And again, thanks so much to Faduma and the whole TCAF for being able to put this amazing festival together and also this amazing panel together. So thank y'all.
Absolutely. Thank you. This should be a continuous podcast, like Chapel Girl.
Don't tempt me. Do not tempt me.
On that note, thank you so much, for joining us. S-Quire Johnson, thank you so much for your brilliant moderation. You really know how to hold the room and keep us all on our game with this. Thank you so much for igniting so much of our passions with all the right questions. Appreciate you so much, fam. Thank you so much to Jaime Hernandez and Katie Skelly, Jarrett Williams, Aubrey Sitterson and Chris Moreno. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us. And with that note, TCAF is brought to you in part by Seneca College School of Creative Arts and Animation, with a special thanks to the Beguiling Books and Art, Page and Panel, the TCAF Shop, government support from Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council. Also check out our online marketplace to get your hands on all the wonderful comics art from our amazing lineup of creators. We have a pretty rad list of exhibitors to navigate on our website. So thank you everyone, and happy TCAF because Stone Cold said so.
Bye.
Thanks y'all.